Okay. Hi, my name is Miguel. I come from Portugal, which is actually, in my opinion, the only place in the world that has better food than you guys have here. Um, we also have a lot of churches, although not a single one as big as this monstrosity that we saw a couple days ago. But anyway, I'm here to talk about tools. I'm going to talk about how to master or get more out of your tools, about the way you write code, or at least that's the focus of my talk and my work. It's writing code. I expect most people here do that as well. So that's what I'm going to talk about: writing code, not what code to write, or if it's efficient code or beautiful code or other code, but about how you write it, what tools you use, most of your text editor, and a couple other things. During the talk, I'm going to talk mostly about my tools, the things that I use, essentially how I do a few things. There's going to be a few live demos in a few minutes, hopefully. But the point of the talk is not about that. It's not about me telling you that what I use is what you should use. Instead, it's just about the methodology and the way of thinking about trying to figure out better ways to do things. Because sometimes we get stuck in old habits, and we spend a few years doing the same thing, and we don't realize that sometimes there's an even faster way, even if it's just 1% faster. In the long term, that might help. So I don't really care if you code in something as huge as NetBeans or PyCharm, like the talk we saw yesterday, or in something as small as Notepad. Hopefully you don't use Notepad, however. But what I'm going to talk about here is related to Vim. Anybody here uses Vim, or at least knows what it is? Okay. Who uses it? Not just knows it? Okay, a few people. So most of you know what it is. Vim is a text editor. It seems it needs no introduction. It's pretty popular as well, so no need to waste time on this. And the first concept I'm going to talk about is the concept of feedback loop. And this is a kind of a very generic concept, but I can explain it as the time it takes since we get an idea, we have a thought that we want to put into action, and the time it takes to get it done, to get it, in this case, to write the code and to see the results. And that can be something very granular, like thinking of what do I want to call this function and actually typing that name and saving the file or whatever. Or it can be something much more high level, like thinking about what CSS we want to type, write the CSS, and then check the browser to see if everything works correctly, or run our tests to see if it passes. So this is a loop that happens all the time while we work, even at lower levels or at higher levels. And it's usually what I think about when I try to optimize things. And when I mean optimize, I'm talking about my workflow. So if I see something about the way I write code that allows me to shorten this loop, say instead of taking 0.3 seconds to write a line, if I start taking 0.1 seconds, that sounds like a kind of over-engineering, like my title. But in the long run, if I can do this for most of my code, that's actually going to save me a lot of time and hopefully make me a better developer. And one of the most simple ways to do that is with shortcuts. So shortcuts, I guess they need no explanation. We have them on every single program. I'm talking about shortcuts in a more broader way, actually. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But about shortcuts, this is probably the simplest solution to making a large task be smaller. Like if we type a shortcut that does a lot of stuff for us, it's basically easier. But instead of so for example with NetBeans and with PyCharm, which I have nothing against, it's just my personal opinion. But with those editors, you get a full-blown IDE with hundreds of shortcuts that we can't really. It takes a lot to learn them, and sometimes, like this, for those of you who were at PyCharm talk yesterday, you might be using that editor for a couple of years and you didn't realize that it was this shortcut that would take a whole lot of work from something you've been doing manually over and over. And so I don't really, for me, that don't really work because there are a lot of shortcuts that they're trying to force into me and I don't have time to learn them, or sometimes I don't even know they exist. And so for me, it's best to just get my own shortcuts, learn them as time goes on, a few at a time, so that I can train my memory to use them. And so I follow two principles here. Anybody knows what the KISS principle is? It's not the band. So KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid, and it's basically a way to say that don't overcomplicate, don't over-engineer it. And this goes back to what I was just saying. Instead of getting hundreds of shortcuts or tooltips that I can use to do something, I just start small. As time goes on, I figure out, okay, this particular task I'd like to improve on it. I do this all the time. Maybe if I make a specific shortcut for this, I can work better. And as time goes on, I keep learning. And the second thing is reminders, because sometimes it's hard to memorize things, and we want to take them slowly. So one thing I do for this is set up actual physical reminders. So for example, if I'm trying to learn a few shortcuts, not these ones, by the way, this is a small joke. I'll set up a post-it note next to my computer with 3 or 4 shortcuts that I'm learning at that specific time. I'm not learning anything else, I'm just trying to get those into my brain. For example, a small plugin that I'm using, or a couple of shortcuts that I made the previous week. And as time goes on while I'm working, eventually I'm going to look at that shortcut during my work and think, okay, maybe this is useful here, let's use it. And over time, it goes into my muscle memory, and after a couple of weeks, or maybe more, maybe less, I don't even think about them anymore, I just start using them. And at that point, I can just drop the shortcuts and drop the post-it notes and set up another one if I want. And that way I keep learning stuff without, like I said, without NetBeans stuffing hundreds of shortcuts into me that I'm probably not going to learn, or didn't learn. That was my bad experience with those editors. And the other thing are small things like aliases. I use the terminal, by the way. I use mostly Vim, the terminal, and the browser. Since I'm a web developer, I rarely need anything more than that. Anyone else here uses a terminal more? Or so, for example, to use Git, do you use a terminal? Do you use whatever your IDE gives you? Terminal? Okay, great. Right audience. So one thing that is pretty simple. Most people, that, at least that I see, don't do it, and it actually saves much more time than one would think, is to do aliases. So for example, instead of typing Git, I just type G. Instead of typing Vim, I just type V, and so on. And this is really simple, and probably a lot of you already do this. But I'm kind of surprised sometimes about how many people don't do this, or don't realize how much how much this improves my the number of keys I type, basically. And I actually measured it. So Git stands for 23% of all the commands that I type on a terminal. So those 2 letters that I saved, in the long run, this is like 2 years of data. That's actually a lot of time. I could even measure how long it takes an average to press a key, and say that I saved hours of work. There's a few other commands here, but since the percentage is really small, it's not really even that much important to measure them. And actually, for example, RSpec, which is the test framework for Ruby that I use, I don't even type this. This is a command that I have on Vim that runs this for me. So these 2% aren't even my own. But yeah, with Git and Vim and CD, this makes up already 30 something percent of my commands, and the rest of them are pretty small as well, so I don't really care much about them. And going a step further, I can do custom Git commands as well. So for example, at my company we have a very specific workflow about how we use Git. So to create a feature, we will create a branch, do our work, submit a pull request to GitHub, eventually it will get reviewed. And for that, that's a whole process that's in the previous days I would have to physically go to GitHub and open a pull request through their interface. And that actually takes a lot of time, and I tend to avoid using the mouse or getting out of my terminal and getting out of context. And then I'm at my browser, eventually I'm on Facebook, and I'm not working anymore. And so I just set up a command, gppr. This stands for push pull requests. This is a custom Git command that I made, which does it for me. That it pushes the branch to GitHub if it's not already there, and then it creates a pull request. There's an API for that, and a couple other tools that help me with this. But I can create a pull request from the command line, and it opens the Vim, my editor, so that I can type the pull request description, and so I don't even have to get out of context, and I can just keep with my work. And even more interesting is the CPR, which stands for close pull request. This is an even more interesting one because to close a pull request, the flow is even more complicated. So I have to wait for someone to review it, and after it's reviewed, I need to update it with master because some changes might have gone there before. I need to rebase the branch, squash everything to a single commit or a couple. Probably edit the commit message to make it more meaningful and remove the work in progress stuff. Merge that to master, push the updated master, delete the remote branch, and this is about 6-7 commands I think in Git, or a few more clicks on GitHub. And I just compile it all to a single script. The script will do all this for me. If at any point it fails, for example, if the master branch had conflict with my branch, I will get the conflicts and the script will stop, so I can just solve the conflicts and try it again. It will delete the branch for me. It will update the pull request description. Sorry. And I actually wrote a blog post about it at my company's blog, if you want to look at it later. But this actually saves me a lot of work, because all of those 7-8 commands I would type they would take a long time, and they were error prone and stuff like that. And so I'm really happy with this, and there are a few others. But essentially, with this, I type like 4 or 5 keystrokes, and I do a whole task, and I don't leave the context of my terminal, so that helps me focus, that helps me keep going in my work. So, to recap this part, just keep it simple, set reminders, make yourself remember what shortcuts you're trying to learn, or keep learning stuff a single step at a time, and let them sink in, let them go into your muscle memory so that you don't even have to think about them, because that's when they're the most useful. And next I want to talk a bit about TDD, test-driven development. This, I guess, this also needs no introduction. This is a practice that most developers, at least from my community, do. By the way, I'm from the Ruby community. I don't even use Python, mostly, apart from a couple other scripts. So TDD, when using TDD, we'll make a small change to our code. We'll run the tests, at least the tests that are relevant to that feature. See what happens. Change the code again accordingly, and keep going in this loop until everything is working and we're happy with the feature. And this goes back to the feedback loop thing I mentioned. So when the time it takes between me changing the code, the tests running, and me seeing the effects, seeing if it failed or passed, that's the same loop that I was talking about before. So this is actually something that we can try to optimize, and that I spent a lot of time doing this, because there wasn't really For example, in NetBeans and other stuff that I used before, this was really painful to use, and I wasn't really happy with it, and that's how I eventually moved to Vim and figured out a few other plugins that I could use. And also, there's some people that I hear or read, they say that they don't do TDD because it takes too long and it takes a lot of out of their work time because maybe tests take too long to run. And there are maybe two issues here. If the tests take too long to run, that's also an issue, probably an issue that's not relevant to this talk and it could be worth a talk of its own. But it could also be an issue that the tests take too long, but the tests don't take too long, but you take too long to run them and to wait for to get to the button or whatever you need to run them, and that makes it take a long time as well. And so it will seem like a long time when in fact the test might be faster. You're just taking too long to run them. And so I'd like to show a little bit about how I do TDD with Vim, and later on a couple of other tricks and plugins that I use. Hopefully. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So, is this? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to use the repository for my company's blog. It's a Rails app. It's not Python, but the code is not really relevant. It's just the most basic app that I had here, where I could showcase everything. So what I do in Vim, let's say I'm in post spec, let's say. These are the tests for the post model. And this is actually really simple. There's nowadays there's a plugin that does this. Previously I had to do this with 2 or 3 plugins and a couple of custom other things. But if I want to run these tests, the tests for maybe I'm working on the post model, I just run a single shortcut. In this case, it's 3 keystrokes. This plugin opens a Vim split on the side. It's running the tests. In this case, it's taking a lot of space because the resolution is very small. But the main idea here is that I'm running the tests, but I can keep working on the code. Like I just see them running on the side. I didn't even leave the buffer that I was working on. And so it's really smooth. I can also run a single test. So if I have my cursor on this first test, this is a test in our spec. If I want to run this single one, there's a slightly different shortcut that will just run that single test. And there can be a few other tweaks to this, like I can have a watcher that will automatically run the test files that I changed or the relevant tests. There's a lot of other tooling for that, if you prefer it. I personally don't. I like to run them manually, and it seems to work better for me. But it might be different for you. And this, like I said, this is a very small demo, but actually the tooling underneath is very robust. I would say it could compete with anything that we can see on NetBeans or PyCharms. I saw yesterday on the talk that they have a lot of features to run tests, but for me that's too many features. I just want to run them, and with this kind of features I can run them just as fast or even faster than on those tools. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was how I navigate through the code. If you use Vim, you might know a couple of these things, maybe not all. So does anybody here know what this command is? No one? Okay, a couple people. So FZF is a fuzzy finder, a fuzzy search. You probably know it. It's something where you can search without the exact keyword. You can just type a similar part or bits and pieces of the word. And FZF is a really good tool. It came out last year, I think. And if I run it by default, it just shows me a list of all the files in my directory. And as I start typing, it will match any file name. And since it's fuzzy, I don't even have to type the whole name. I can type, like, for example, mod post, and it will find the post model and a few other files that are not relevant for here. We'll see a bit later how this integrates with Vim, but it's just out of the box. And there's another tool that I want to show before going back to Vim, which is RG. Anyone knows this? Or if not RG, there's a couple of others. AG, it's called the Silver Searcher, and ACK, I think, was the first one. Or grep, it's also used for this. This is a search tool, but instead of searching for the file names, it searches for the whole content of the files. So in this case, for the whole source code of my blog. So for example, if I type RG subvisual, it's going to find me all the occurrences of the word subvisual within my code base. By default, this uses the git ignore file, so any temporary files or any file that I don't care about will probably be there and will be ignored as well. I can customize that to ignore additional files if I want. For example, here, this found a lot of stuff, JavaScript files, and this probably, JS map file. So I can filter this to search only for Ruby files, which is probably what I want here. And you can see that this is extremely fast. I've used this with very large code bases. I can't tell the exact sizes, but I've never really had any problems with it. Probably with something Facebook scale or GitHub scale, you would have problems, but I guess that's not the average use case. And so if I go back to Vim, these two tools integrate really well with Vim and with each other. So FZF has its own Vim plugin where I just type Control-P and it shows the same preview that you saw before. And as I type the same fuzzy query, I can see the results, I can select the file, and I can open it. It's really simple. And same thing for rip grep. There's a slightly different shortcut, Control-F. It opens the same preview. This is rip grep powered by FZF on top. So I get both of them. And if I search by subvisual, it's going to find me all the lines in my code with subvisual. I can see the file name as well. And since I can type flags here, I can do a small trick. So for example, .rb subvisual. Because the file name is part of the match, that's going to mostly work. So I can find all the Ruby files with the subvisual word. This is not a 100% exact search, as you might expect, but it works for 90% of the cases. And I guess that's good enough. So these are the two main things I use to navigate my code. The third thing is C tags. Do you use them? Do you know what they are? Okay, a couple people as well. They were originally done for the C language, but actually they play very nice with Ruby and I believe Python as well, and most languages. And C tags is a tool that indexes your code, your function names, both where they're used and where they're declared, so that you can quickly jump from one place to another. If you use an IDE, they also have these kind of features for you. C tags is just another option. So for example, if I search for, okay, on this file I'm calling the name method on a user, and I have this repository indexed with C tags. This is also integrated with Vim and Git, so every time I do a Git commit, I check out a branch or something, C tags will run automatically for me with a Git hook. And so I can easily find where this name method is defined with a shortcut, and it goes to the user class on my code base. It found the name method. Again, this is not 100% exact. So for example, this is a little bit of meta programming that Rails does that defines the posts method, but there's no explicit posts method here, so it probably won't find any if I tried it. But 90% of the case it works. And it goes even a step further, because I'm not only indexing my own source code, I'm indexing my source code and all the packages that I'm using, in this case the Ruby gems. which is the equivalent for Python packages. So for example, this strip method, it takes a string and removes spaces at the edges. And this is defined by Rails, but I can go there as well. If I type the same shortcut, okay, it's not Rails actually, but I went to the definition of the strip method inside whatever gem this is using. You can see on the path that this is not even my my repository anymore. It went to the gem path. I can see the source code. I can go gsub, okay, it's another method. I can go all the way down as long as the method is defined. Then, and since this works like a stack, anytime I go to the definition of a method, I'm pushing to a stack. I can type another shortcut to go back in the stack and go back to where I was before. And so I actually use this quite a lot when I'm trying to debug something that's probably a bug in the package and not in my code. I go to that code, I put a debugger there and work from there. And this also saved me a lot of time in the past couple of years. And finally, probably the most recent part I've been working on. Since some people use Vim, does anyone know what Vim projectionist is? Okay, no one, I guess. This is probably my favorite Vim plugin. It was created by Tim Pope, which has all the best Vim plugins. And this allows me to define mappings between my files. So for example, like for every file in my source code, I can define what its alternate file is. This is pretty useful, for example, to say that the alternate of my user model is the test file for my user model. And I define this pair of files. I do that with, or Vim projectionist allows me to do that with a small, it's not really a regex, but it's something similar. I say that for the app/model/ star RB, the equivalent file will be spec.model/ same bits ._spec.rb. And then on top of this, projectionist defines a few key maps that allows me to switch back and forth between the two. So if I go back to my post model, if I want to see the tests for this file, I could go to post spec. This is the file. You can see the match between the model name and the file, the spec name. The only difference is that it's in the spec directory instead of app, and it has _spec at the end. So it's pretty easy to create a mapping between the two. But instead of using Control-P, I can just use Vim projectionist and type space AA, and it goes to that file. And same shortcut, goes back again. Or I can type space AV, and it opens the spec file on a split. From here, I can run its tests. Again, screen is real small here. But yeah, with a few shortcuts, I can navigate between files without even having to think about where they are. Okay. And another thing that I want to talk about before going back to this projections plugin is about snippets. Snippets, I haven't used that part before until a few months ago when I started working on my own snippets. Well, if you don't know, a snippet is a repeatable bit of code that you can call easily from somewhere, like with a shortcut or with a keyword that inserts a snippet of code wherever your cursor is, and that's really useful for code that you type a lot. For example, at the beginning in every Ruby file, I'm probably going to have a class with the same name as the file, and so I'm going to so if let's say I create a file called foo.rb, I'm probably going to have this right here, and probably a constructor function and a bunch of other things. And this is the same for every single file, or mostly the same with a few minor changes. And so I can create snippets for it. For this I use a Vim plugin called Ultisnips, and this is actually done in Python. And the snippets allow me to do Python extensions. So So I guess this is basically the only Python experience I had before coming to the conference. But what I can do instead is go back to this foo.rb file and type, I have a snippet called class. And all the snips works by, I define the snippet with a keyword, I type the keyword, and when my cursor, if my cursor is after a keyword and then I type the plugin shortcut, it will insert the corresponding snippet. So the snippet for class it's the definition of a class, but since I can use Python to create dynamic snippets, I can dynamically make that part based on the name of the file. So I actually have a few Python functions that I wrote that take the name of the file, which all these snips gives to me. It's small transformations to the name, and I infer the name of the class from the name of the file. This can go even more complicated because if I have nesting, so if I have a directory here and I have another file here, the convention in Ruby is to have a module called nested with a class called another inside. And again, this is really simple to do. I can also do even more complicated things because the Python snippet is evaluated every time I type a keystroke. And so I can have even more interesting things like an initializer. So in most languages, I guess, there's a really repeated pattern where in the constructor of a function, of a class, you receive a bunch of arguments, and you assign those arguments to instance variables. So A goes to the instance variable A, B goes to B, etc. And this can be done with a snippet. So I define this snippet called define initializer, and it creates the boilerplate for the initializer. But as I type, and I can type a list of arguments here, and it keeps inserting the instance variable definitions inside the method. And I can type a bunch of things here. This star is all valid Ruby code. It also works. And then if I type the same shortcut again, it goes to the end of the snippet. I can define several breakpoints inside my snippet to jump to. So I don't even have to navigate to the end. I can just come here and start keep working again. There's a bunch of other ones that we can basically type, create the snippets that we want. Again, going back to what I said during the shortcuts thing, I prefer to define my own snippets instead of using the default ones because I probably won't remember to use them. And now going even a step further, there's a really cool integration that we can do with projectionist and ultisnips, because if you think about it, when I create a file called foo.rb, I probably will want to create the class snippet inside of it. So I can have projectionist call the snippet for me, or call a callback that ultisnips can catch and do that for me. And that's actually been done, and I replicated that work. So if I open a buffer with a file for a file that does not exist, this will actually call a certain callback in Vim projectionist that I can use and see, okay, is there a snippet defined as a skeleton for this kind of file? And I define this in projectionist. So any file that's in the app directory will have assigned the snippet class. And so when I open this file, which again, this file does not exist, it will automatically fill it out with the class name. And now, using Vim projectionist, I can go to its spec file. So I tried to navigate to the alternate file. It told me the spec file does not exist, but projectionist allows me to create it. So I choose the name. I confirm that this is the file name that I want to create. I create it, and again I have another snippet that fills it out with the boilerplate for a test file. In this case, I have. The only hard part about this is that it's probably specific to a particular language or even to a particular framework. this works in Rails. I have a couple of them defined for Rails, for Elixir, for CSS, because those are the ones that I use. But the hard part is that you have to define them depending on what you use. But I guess for me, it pays off a lot. Now let's see if I can go back to my slides. Okay. Okay. Finally, I want to talk about a little bit about learning and measuring all this stuff, because I come from a background in high-performance computing, and one of the things that I got there, my advisor was really picky about it, is that you can't really tell that you're optimizing anything unless you really measure it and show some data. And of course, learning is also useful to keep improving. One thing that I often do to learn about this is to see how other people are doing it. That can go from coming to conferences like this and seeing, learning new tricks from anyone, or even if I'm pair programming with my coworker who's there every day with me. At that specific day, I'm pair programming with him, and I notice that he uses something that I haven't even thought about before. So even the guy that's sitting next to me for 2 years can tell me something new. And I can also see how the pros, I guess, are doing it. At least people that I follow and that I know are interesting. So, for example, there are a couple of things that I really like and recommend. The play-by-play is a series of screencasts that were done by Geoffrey Rosenbach. This is a Rails guy. He did a series of screencasts that are really interesting, where he invited, in each episode, he invited a famous speaker or programmer, and he pair programmed with them. And it's really interesting to see both how they solve the problems, how their mind thinks about it, but also how they use their tools. Sometimes it gets really silly. You can either learn a lot or see that guy who's who you thought was a really good programmer doesn't even know how to do a basic bash command sometimes. So it's either really instructive or really funny. And the second thing is Twitch, which this slide is a bit outdated because there are a couple others now. But Twitch is the game live streaming platform. But since last year or a couple of years ago, there's been a trend of starting to live code as well. So there's people on Twitch programming, either for money or just for the sake of it. Nowadays there are a couple other sites which I can't really remember the name, but they're like Twitch but dedicated to coding, and you can even gain money out of it if you're interesting enough, and if you create a community of followers that like to watch you, you can monetize on it. And going back to the learning part, to the measuring part, I mean, to measure how we're doing things. I already showed this slide before. This is a pretty basic way to measure it, but pretty effective one. So I'm measuring that these are the commands that I use the most, and so maybe it's not really important to try to make an alias for this or whatever. I just don't care. It's not relevant. But I have the data to show it, and that's what counts. Another thing that I'm doing, or that I've been trying to do for the past few months, is to build a heat map of my keyboard to see what keystrokes I'm pressing. This is going really deep in the rabbit hole, to be honest. But I'm interested to see what keys I use the most, what keys I use less, to see if there's a key that's closer to my resting position that would be more comfortable to use than the one that's all the way on the other side of the keyboard. And it's really hard to do that unless I measure it and I see data like this. And speaking on keyboards, I wanted to talk a little bit about our own. So this is the keyboard from a guy at our company. It's really unusual if you haven't seen this kind of layout before. Anyone uses or knows what this layout is? A couple of people as well. So this keyboard is called a Kinesis. The layout, so the the character keys are the same, but you can see that the meta keys are in this position. The idea is that your thumbs should do the work on those keys. And this layout works really well because mostly you don't really have to move your wrists to reach at least the most important keys. This is the biggest benefit of this is your health, because wrists can get injured if you use them badly a lot for several years. But I also got a lot of productivity out of this as well. So this is not my keyboard. My keyboard is this one. I'm not sure if you can see it correctly. This is an Ergodox. It's completely open source, both the hardware and the firmware. And it's the same layout as the previous one, but the firmware is done with an open source C program that I can download. And I can literally build my own key map by editing the firmware and customize what keys do I want. For example, the rest of my colleagues who also have this, they use a Mac. I use Linux, so my key layout is probably going to be a little bit different. I want certain keys to be in certain positions. And besides the health thing, the not moving my wrists benefit. Time's up?
Yes, no.
Okay. Since the firmware is in C and it allows me to do really crazy things, I ended up optimizing a lot out of this without when that wasn't even the original benefit. But again, if you're fine with this, there's really no problem. As long as you're productive, that's what counts. And so the main outcome I wanted to get here was to look at your tools, to see what you're using, and to try to figure out if you're using them correctly, or if you can use other tools better than ones you're using, and to learn from everyone around you, from the guy who works with you, at these conferences, and on the internet as well. Thank you.